Brad here at Etrailer, and today we're taking a look at the Roadmaster BrakeMaster second motorhome kit. And this is going to be a great option for those of you that may have a BrakeMaster braking system on your flat-towed vehicle, and maybe you've changed RVs, and that way you can still get all the hookups necessary for that flat-tow vehicle to get the indication for braking as well as the air pressure to be able to stop and slow down the vehicle while towing it. Now, if you're familiar with the BrakeMaster and you already have it on your vehicle, you're probably pretty aware of this cable. And this is going to run across from the RV to the flat-towed vehicle and connect to the quick connect fittings. And our kit is going to allow us to have the quick connect fitting as well as our cable here. And that way we can get the indication on the dash that our brakes are being applied. And then we also have our air line that's going to run to the cylinder as well as the reservoir on the towed vehicle. And all that air pressure is going to transfer through this hose. So tapping into our brake relay to get that main air from our coach is going to be running through this push connect eventually. So it comes with the fittings to tap into that. And this kit's going to be great for air over air brakes or air over hydraulic. And the instructions do a fine job of letting you know how to get that all attached. This kit does not come with this cable. So if you have your existing one with your flat tow vehicle, this will go in just the same. If you need to pick up an extra one, we have these available here at Etrailer. All flat tow braking systems have some sort of indication to let you know that the brakes are being applied, and this one comes with a light that you mount on your dash. It has a nice sticker to let you know exactly what that light is, and it's just a patch cable that runs from the inside of your vehicle where you tap it into light all the way back to where your hitch is, and that way you can attach to the patch cable that's attached to our connecting cable, and then eventually on the vehicle side you have this bullet connector that runs to the cold side of the brake switch. So that way when the brakes are applied, it'll send that signal all the way up to the front on the dash wherever you mount that light and let you know that they're being applied. Now today we installed this kit on a 2004 Diplomat Monaco, and this is an air-to-air or air-over-air braking system. And if yours isn't a Diplomat Monaco, not to worry, all the concepts are essentially going to be the same. They might be slightly different on how you need to run things or tap in, but it's going to give you a great rundown of how to get it installed on your coach. Now if you're air over hydraulic, it might be slightly different, but again, the instructions are really good, and this will at least get that patch cable all installed, and just the only difference is going to be the connection portion, but the rest of it is going to be all the same. So hopefully this helps you no matter what coach you have. Beginner installation, first we're going to want to get our patch cable ran, and this portion is going to go on the back where you would hook it up to the connecting patch cable on your tow bar and eventually to your towed vehicle. So being that this is a second RV kit, more than likely you already have that set up. So on our RV, we'll just zip tie this up on the hitch close to where our attachment points are going to be. Now they give you a decent amount of length of wire, but on our Monaco today, I pretty much used all of it, and in fact I'll have to extend it. So if you don't want to extend it, just make sure you get a nice straight path, avoiding anything that's moving, hot, or anything that can damage the cable long term. So I used a lot of the factory wire loom and mounts to get all the way up to the front and eventually inside by the driver's steering wheel. That way we can get our monitor light mounted. So let's track this and show you how I routed it. From our hitch, I just followed a lot of this wire loom, as I mentioned before, even some of the loom clamps that they have, and just routed along. I left all my zip ties on here so you can track this. I went up into the frame rail openings and just kind of continued my way along all these bundles of wire. Right above our axle, I just used the cross beam to run over to make my way over to the driver's side. So I just routed this down, and then along this entire ledge, I was able to run our wire. There were a few spots where zip ties weren't there, so I just put a loom clamp just to hold that up, and then made my way up here. And once we get to the front, I just routed this up to get it away from any steering and suspension, and I made my way up towards the front compartment, and that way I can get our patch panel ran inside. And that way I can get our patch cable run up and mounted up to our light inside the RV. Now making my way to the compartment was so that I could get this routed up inside the vehicle. So what I actually did was went inside, found where a lot of our wire loom feeds in, and they just use spray foam to fill that gap. So it makes it nice and easy to be able to fish wire through using the airline tube that is actually included in the kit. If you cut a small section, this becomes a really good pull wire. So what I did was just cut a sharp end and went through the spray foam that goes into our compartment. That way I could feed the wire in here, and then I used that same pull wire to just get that routed up. I taped it with some electrical tape and pulled our wire, and now I have it inside the driver compartment. Over here on our driver's side, there's this panel that covers up our wire, and I just pulled that off with a few Phillips head screws, and I was able to get our pull wire pulled up. And even with pulling all the slack out, I wasn't left with a ton of extra wire here. So I could mount this up really anywhere here and I'd be fine. I'm going to just extend our wires a very little bit, and that way I can attach our light to our panel that I've removed here. I think this is going to be a good portion, and just pulling this out makes it a little bit easier to get everything ran there. So I will extend my wire. I have some extra wire here with a butt connector, so I'll give myself a little bit of extra length and then I'll pull it out. With my wire extended, I have it coming through the panel that I removed. This is nice and open, so that's something to keep in mind when you make a spot for your indicator light. Making sure that it can pass all the way back, because it does have a little bit of length to it, is going to be crucial. So something else that you're going to want to do when running those wires is take a look for a good grounding spot. We do need to run a ground off this wire. So I'm going to get the light attached first, and then we can make our connections. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is really determine exactly where we want it. So, you know, just kind of pretend like you're driving along, and where would be a good spot to see that indication. Ours is going to be right about here. So there's a spot on the sticker. I'm going to use that as my marker. And I just took off that center portion where the light is going to go, and that just marks it out. So it's going to sit right about here. So we're going to need to get that drilled out, and we're going to be using a 5/16 drill bit, which is going to be the diameter or very close to what our light is. And so whatever panel you're doing this on, just take your time here and make sure you get a nice clean hole drilled. Now we can take our sticker and place that hole where we just drilled it. And then we'll take our light and we're going to pass this through. You can also grab, we have our retainer clip, and this is going to slide. You can see it's concave. You want that to bite into the backside plastic, so when we press it on, it's going to want to bite into it and hold this in place. So we'll take our wires, feed this through, and we can pop this in. It does snap into place. It's got little clips that kind of holds it there temporarily, but putting our retainer clip on the back is going to really hold that in place. It's backward. And with that in place, now we can just attach our wires. So our red wire is the one that I extended, and normally it's black. That's going to go to our red wire, and then as I mentioned, our ground, we're going to want to find a good spot for that, whether we use a factory ground or we use a self-tapping screw on a ring terminal. But I'm going to extend this for our sake. That way I have a little bit of mobility in finding that ground. Now, if you do need extra wire or butt connectors, we sell both of those here at Etrailer. Just try to get a wire that's a similar gauge, and that's going to make sure that we have, you know, proper power and ground going through there. And with that extended, on the end of our ground, I will grab our ring terminal and get that put on. For a little added protection, I just taped up our butt connectors. That way we don't have anything coming loose long term. So I'll feed our wires back in and feed our ground wire and ring terminal in there as well, so I can make that connection. Now we can put our panel back in place. Now I got my ground attached to a factory ground underneath the dash, but as I mentioned before, if you can't find a good factory ground, you can always use a self-tapping screw and mount it into some of the chassis metal to get our ground. But with our panel put back in place, we have our light and our patch cable all ran. Now we can start on the air. As far as getting air pressure to our fitting, the best way to do this is find our relay valve. And generally what you can do if you have air brakes like we have today is if you follow the lines in, they go into two regulators for ABS generally. But normally your manifold here, the brake relay, you'll have a supply line going into it. And based on this solenoid here, it determines when that brake pressure is being called for that air to open up. So The best way to check is to find two of the unused ports, or if you just have one. And what we're going to do is slowly loosen this up. We're not going to completely release it quite yet. You should not have air pressure coming out. If you do have air pressure coming out, you're on the wrong spot. So what I'm going to do is with an 8mm hex, I'm going to loosen this, and then with an assistant, what you're going to want to do is step on the brake pedal and see if air pressure comes out. Now, if you're doing this by yourself, what you could probably do is just take a piece of painter's tape and put it over here. Plenty of pressure comes out. So if you're pressing the brake pedal, you should have air pushing that, and if the tape is gone, you know that that's the proper spot. So I'll loosen this up, I'll have my assistant press the brakes, and we should have air coming through here. Now, once you determine that that's where the air is coming from when you depress the brakes, you can remove this cap. Now, there's two compression fittings that come in the kit, so what you can do is just take your plug and the thread should match up to one of them. So determining this to be our correct fitting, we're going to grab some Teflon, whether it be liquid or Teflon tape, and we're going to wrap this. And just to make sure we don't lose it in the process, we're going to take off our compression nut and the ferrule. Make sure you hold on to that. And now we can take this back with an 11/16 wrench, and we'll get this snug in place. Now, when getting this back in place, it's important with brass fittings, tighter is not always better. In fact, that runs the risk of causing damage. So I'm going to hand thread it as much as possible. And then generally, rule of thumb for me is going to be 1.5 turns, and that should be enough. So just kind of keep track of that when you tighten with that 11/16. We're going to have to do quarter turns on ours, so we'll be making 6 rotations. With those 6 rotations, that it started getting tight on me, and that's good. If it starts binding up on you earlier, don't overpower it. You don't want this to crack. I think this should be good for us. Now, grabbing our airline tube, we obviously have a ton of excess here. It doesn't matter where you grab from. Either way, when putting anything on the end of airline tube, it can become deformed and a little rounded, making it to where it's not going to be a nice seated feel once it's tightened down, and we don't want to run the risk of any airline leaks. So with a tubing cutter, which is just a razor blade on a hard surface, I got a nice clean square cut. And then what we'll do is we'll take our compression nut and we'll feed that on first. It's a little tight, and just slide this back. You can then take your ferrule, and you can put this about 1/4 inch back. And then we'll take our brass insert, and this is going to go into the end. So then when we go back to that fitting and we tighten this down, it's going to compress that and give it airtight seal. Now we'll take that airline with all of our brass in there. Drop that in. If you want, you can push that ferrule forward, or you can use the compression nut to just draw that in. Just make sure that this is threading on properly. It should go on fairly easily by hand. And make sure that you don't cross thread. And to get this tightened down is going to be a 1/2 inch wrench. And same thing, just kind of go along with, you know, not over tightening. So I'm going to still do about 1.5 turns on here. You're going to run that airline back, but I recommend finding the spot that you want to mount your quick connect fitting on the back. Generally, this is going to be very close to our patch cable, so I think I could probably mount this up here. Just make sure that you have, you know, easy access to with your hose, and pretty easy too. You're going to want to make sure that you have obviously a spot to run that airline to where it's not going to kink. So if you want to, you can take off that compression fitting and the compression nut. And then just using self-tapping screws, or you can drill through the metal and get this mounted up with a nut and bolt combo. But either way, get this mounted exactly where you want it. In an effort to keep this close to my patch panel, I got a little bit creative here. I just kind of bent this up, and it's going to rest right on here in the metal. I'll self-tap that in, but this also allows that brass fitting to be at a point where I can run that airline. And I do think it's going to be quite a bit easier if I attach it first. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get my airline ran back, get it attached just like we did on our manifold up there, same ferrule, compression nut, and then from here, we'll just get it all mounted up, and I'll show you the finished product. Before I get this permanently mounted up with our self-tappers, I want to check to make sure we don't have any leaks. So I'm going to grab some soapy water, and then with my assistant, I'll have them hop in. And wherever we made connections, we want to spray that down with soapy water and look for any bubbles forming. We shouldn't have any, but if we do, that's going to point us to where we need to double check our connections. So with my assistant on the brakes, when he presses them down, I noticed that we have large air bubbles forming. So with that, we're going to want to make sure that we take a look at our fitting here. And I did notice on ours, you're going to want a wrench on the bottom when tightening this down. And again, just tightening it down is not necessarily the best way to fix a brass fitting, but we want to make sure that we don't have any air leaks long term. So I'll play around with this, make sure I get it proper to where it's not leaking. And if it's not working properly, you still get leaks, you may want to cut your air line again, double check all your fittings, and then try again. With mine, I just put a wrench on the bottom side. I gave it maybe a quarter turn, and that was enough to finish up to make sure we don't have that leak. So now I'll get this mounted up. All that's left to do is hook this up to your towed vehicle and make sure everything's working properly. And that was a look at the Roadmaster BrakeMaster second motorhome kit.